Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to have you all here today and really looking forward to this discussion today. Um, so today we're going to talk about interviews, and I'm sure you all have a lot of thoughts, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts because I don't have answers. I've got, and I'm always searching for answers in this field. Let me tell you that. So, yeah, anybody want to start? Who's interested? I'm sure some of you tech elevator students / grads have had some experience in this area recently.
Hey everyone.
Any interview
my name is
horror
Chris.
stories?
Welcome, Chris. Thanks.
Yeah, I found Michael's LinkedIn profile, and it was kind of coincidental because I'm just wrapping up a Java bootcamp through Max Technical Training,
Awesome.
and we were going through a course on how to make our LinkedIn profiles look all nice and pretty, and so I've already had an established LinkedIn profile before this, but I was just scrolling through and it suggested a few people, and I saw Michael's name, and I saw on his banner or I saw a banner on his profile pic that said hiring, and then I saw what he did at Kroger, and so I just reached out to him saying, just looking for any advice, and so here we are. He invited me to the tea and tech here for this, and it happened to be a topic on what I asked him about, which was interviews. And so it's very coincidental. I like that. And so I guess coming from my perspective, from a recent graduate from a part-time Java bootcamp, what kinds of things are companies looking for in an interview when they're interviewing a candidate such as myself? From a soft skill question to a technical question, and anything else in between that or outside of that, doesn't matter.
That's a great question, Chris. Thank you for speaking up, and thank you for joining us, for reaching out. Anybody want to take this one? I know we got a few devs in the room who do interviews.
I can
thoughts?
start from my
Sure.
perspective. And Chris,
Excellent.
I know that you're not familiar with me because you're not Tech Elevator. So you'll see a lot of people here from Tech Elevator, but I'm the Pathway program director, so helping all of our students prepare for interviews. So I haven't been in the interviewing seat for a minute, but I was there for a long, long time. And my biggest takeaway or my biggest expectation as far as interviewing is confidence. Even though you just graduated and it's new and it's fresh and it's probably a little scary, I think believing in yourself when you're interviewing, they can tell if you feel comfortable and confident in your abilities, and that's probably the key. So the soft skills that take you there, faking it a little bit till you make it, right? And then I think being able to talk about what you do know and being honest about what you don't know. Just let them know where you're at.
Yeah, that was one of the things in the boot camp going through it, because I was briefly introduced to programming when I was in college. And so when I went through this boot camp, I knew how to make a print line statement very well. And that was about the extent of my knowledge there. So going through this, we definitely got a few speeches regarding imposter syndrome, because there were certainly times where I was thinking to myself, what am I doing here? Like, I don't know what this is exactly. Like, how does this function work? What do these conditions mean? And, so when you say, like, have confidence in what you know and be honest about what you know and what you don't know. So that was definitely something that we were talked to about, to kind of like get over that feeling that you don't belong. And, that's actually really helped. And then my wife went through almost the same boot camp. She went to the .NET boot camp, and so that was 3 years ago. And so when I talked to her, she would just say, well, just tell me what you learned. And so as I explained to her what I learned and then what it meant, it really got us over that hump of, like, what I thought I didn't know, and it turned into something really productive. So I know that that's definitely a huge thing, and I'm glad to hear that you're saying like the same things that I was hearing when you get into an interview situation such as that.
I guess I can
And
expand
just
a little bit
drop.
too on
Go
that
ahead,
topic.
Trip.
I interview a lot of people. I think I've interviewed a lot of people in this call through Tech Elevators, prep day for interviews, and to see if I could line anything up. On top of that, I'm actually an active boot camp student, so I understand both sides of the coin here. My best advice, aside from just doing what you're doing, which is one, you're networking, you're reaching out to people, trying to get an understanding. Sometimes you can take that to the next level and ask for what I call an informational interview. Like, it's just an idea. You reach out to someone and they might not be actively hiring right now. Be like, hey, I'd like to learn more about what you're doing at your company. The reason is I want to see if that lines up with my needs and expectations to learn more about what your everyday function is. And it's a good way to open up that conversation. And then at the end of the call, you can even ask, hey, would you be comfortable referring to me something internally if it does open up? Because having that internal referral just opens up your talk track so much more and gets your resume to the people that matter so much faster. So that's a really good way to do it sometimes. And then aside from that, always just keeping your GitHub active with projects outside of boot camp, because that's one of the quickest ways people are going to look at a Java skill set. And aside from that, just what you're doing, you're networking, you're out there doing it, and just it's going to be hard at times, but just keep going and don't give up. There might be words of discouragement, but just know you have it so that imposter syndrome doesn't take over.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Trip.
Question on the projects and keeping your GitHub active. Is there a place that has some good project ideas that you might recommend?
In terms of that side of thing, it's going to be happening where you have to take an initiative. One thing that I always tell people to do is, like, if there's a local nonprofit that you really have empathy or passion for, or a local group that, like, hey, maybe I'm a part of this group and they need a better presence and there's a way you can work with them, that's always a great way to start, because they'll always appreciate the help and work, and they don't necessarily have the budget to update their tech stack. And it's a good way for you to get an actual project that's going to be out there and living and breathing.
Yeah, I can't. That's absolutely important. So working on something that's not just a pet project or a kata, or I'm sorry, not something that is actually accomplishing work that will fulfill a purpose for someone, even if you're not able to sell it. So I'm trying to remember who I was talking to offhand right now, but they were talking about how they play a video game and they wanted to build something for their group in the video game to help them organize things and keep things in order. And how I think that's really great. It shows, first of all, they're connecting it back to actually fulfilling a need, and they have the experience of going through requirements gathering and understanding, well, this isn't working in this for these people in this way, so maybe I can tweak this to make it more usable for the user. So I think that's a great point about having real usable software.
I have a GitHub related question off the back of that. For those of us who are maybe a little newer to coding, but doing our best to learn, in terms of keeping our GitHub active, is there ever a point where it could even be, I don't know, working against us if our code isn't all as professional as it could be, maybe not implemented the way that a professional developer would do it, or the project is really simple or has a very narrow purpose that you might think oh, this is all this guy can do, or this is the kind of code this person writes? Or do people tend to understand that older projects get put in there as you improve?
I have thoughts about this.
Steven, you want to take it? Oh.
Which are
Yeah.
basically if you look at the code that's on my GitHub, I've been an engineer for 20 years. The code on my GitHub is mostly garbage. So I am personally very accepting of whatever you put out there. The reason that I think having anything on GitHub is helpful is because it's often something that distinguishes you from other candidates. It's something for me to look at to just get a sense of anything. It makes you stand out even just a little bit, because even if I can look at one commit or one PR or one file where you have code, it just gives me the sense that you're potentially like at least that one step above someone who doesn't have that there. Having said that, I don't personally, this might, I don't know, maybe it's controversial, but I don't personally think it is that important for you to have a GitHub, a very active GitHub presence. But if you don't, I do think it's important that you have something that helps you stand out from the 100 other applications that someone gets. That when you have 90 applicants and there's no way to distinguish between them, you're honestly just guessing who to interview.
Thanks for that link, Jessica.
I'm also going to jump in with a different opinion. I haven't interviewed people for a while, but when I was interviewing, I wouldn't look at GitHubs, and I don't keep up personal GitHub either. I think there's a lot of privilege that goes into having the time and the ability to keep up a GitHub profile, like working on side projects and stuff like that, especially if you're, already have a full-time job and have other responsibilities outside of work. So, like it's a double-edged sword, kind of like a thin line to go down, and a lot of pressure for people who may not have the privilege of having the time to keep that up.
Izzy, can I ask you how you would then, like, how would you choose from a handful of candidates? Like, what are you looking for?
I look more, so my motivation for work is teamwork. So I would look more for someone who had like teamwork experiences and stuff like that, or did I was about to say like did like other outside things. So like one of the reasons I don't keep my GitHub up is because I have, a lot of organizations that I volunteer with. So I volunteer my time in other ways as opposed to writing code. But like when I was interviewing, I tried not to look at someone's code before I talked to them because I wanted my first impression of them not be code, because code is also, super opinionated, and what good code looks like to me is going to be different than what good code looks like to Michael or Steven or Jake or anybody. So
Clearly, my opinion on good code is the one that matters, right?
No.
Sad face.
I think, okay, so I'm obviously someone that's non-technical that was interviewing, but I hated when somebody would send me GitHub and I could just see the code because I'm not a developer. So I would be like, cool. Like, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it looks cool, right? I think it's more about the conversation piece that comes with the interview, right? Or explaining what you've created and what it does and what's the functionality behind it, and seeing you light up and have the passion behind what you're working on versus, here, look at my code. Because I feel like, obviously, if I were technical and I knew what to read in the code, it would make sense to me. But since I don't have that, it was more about the conversation piece.
Yeah, and that was really that's what I was going for, Jessica. I just wasn't, good with words. And then like the other thing too that I care about more is how quickly you can learn and how you can learn and adapt to like new situations or unfamiliar situations. Because a lot of the times I was interviewing more junior developers and more like interns and stuff like that. So I wouldn't expect them to have like a fully fledged out GitHub. I cared more about how they were able to learn and adapt and accept feedback that I was giving them when we would do really simple whiteboard problems.
I recently was in a conversation with a bunch of UX people on this, and Jared Spool, I don't know if any of you follow Jared on Twitter or LinkedIn, but he's like one of the leading workshop minds in the UX space. And he put out a great article a while back. I'll have to dig it up. And he said, please don't judge candidates on their portfolio alone, that most working professionals, especially at a higher altitude, don't have time to, they're not right out of college where that's like a requirement. So if their portfolio isn't fully fleshed out, don't judge them. Like that shouldn't be their passing grade. So Izzy, I definitely follow you on that one. I mean, it's true. Like a lot of us don't have time, if we do, there's something's probably going wrong. I don't know. But yeah, it's true in my space as well.
But I think too, once they start working, all the projects that you work on for the majority are going to be private. Like you can't share what you created or what you built because it's owned by the company you work for. So I think it just changes as time goes on.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed a difference in terms of GitHub activity since starting, my career as a software developer, as compared to prior. I was very intentional to be as active as I could be, during that time, kind of leading up to initial interviews, things like that. But now if you're to look at my GitHub history, you'll see little spurts and then nothing for a while and then spurts. And usually when there is that burst, it's because I'm learning something new. And I just figure, might as well put that out there publicly, right? But something I did do, and I don't know how successful this was or not, but I created a portfolio, so a kind of a personal website with links to deployed projects, as well as links to the GitHub repo, so that someone who is technical, who would like to look over the code, can do so. Someone who is not can just interact with the application itself and kind of leave it to the individual on what they want to, explore and interact with, but use that portfolio site as kind of like a single source of access for those things. Well, and something else I would mention, and I guess I'd be interested in other people's opinions on this, but I was reviewing someone else's portfolio recently, and one thing I noticed is that there was actually so many projects on there that I didn't know what I should care about, like what I should look at and what I shouldn't, and so it just made it difficult for me to know what's the best indicator of their skill level, what's the best indicator of kind of where they're currently at. And, I would almost like recommend narrowing it down to a handful, because realistically, that's all anyone's going to look at anyway. So you might as well make sure they actually look at the ones you would want them to look at, and not like, if you have it in alphabetical order or chronological order or something that might actually end up, having something bubble up to the top that you prefer, not be there, the first thing they see or whatever. So yeah, I see someone, looks like someone posted the link to my site on there. So just a fair warning, that's like 2 years old at this point, and I haven't updated or done anything with it since then. But yes, feel free to take a look at it and take a look at the code and do as you will.
So I do have a question sort of related to all of that. So when you are putting, and this, I'm just, for those who don't know me, I'm currently in Tech Elevator at the moment, so I'm very new to this space. This might be like an obvious answer to those who are more experienced, but so obviously, like a lot of your deployed projects, those would be not like you didn't just sit down and write it start to finish. So what is the best way to like sort of convey that it was part of a team? Is it implied? Do you have to say which parts you worked on? Like what's sort of the way that one would go about sharing sort of projects that you were a part of working without accidentally saying, hey, I did all of this, and then it being completely like accidentally disingenuous?
I think what you just did is a great example. You just acknowledged that you worked on a team and that there was parts you did together, and you can take ownership of certain parts of it, but acknowledging that you were with a team and doing it with a team also shows your ability to work with others. And I think that's an important thing to highlight. So I think that's a great aspect of just being honest and open about it, because it's also weird when someone says they've done everything on a project, and that typically doesn't line up. It could happen, but it doesn't always line up.
So you would just like put
The
like
first-
a note with it or something?
You can
You can put that
include
in
in
the
the
README.
README, like, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Thanks.
So, or also just in your resume when you're submitting it, you know, little footnotes about, it's always good to give some kind of context to the project. If there is a project there that you're talking about, and saying why you built it, how you built it, you know, maybe it was just something you built because you wanted to learn about this, about this language. You're like, I've thought that, you know, Ember was super interesting and I wanted to check it out. Not that I would particularly recommend that you go learn Ember right now. Not that it's bad, but it's not super popular. So, yeah.
To completely distract everyone, this is Thomas the Tank Engine. He is our newest dog. He is one of 3 pit bulls that we own. And we're getting him used to me being at a computer, so.
Very nice. Thank you,
I love
Izzy.
that name.
So I have a question then.
Any other thoughts
regarding-
on that or more questions? Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah. So I obviously I just said I was in a Java boot camp. What does the space look like as far as what program language to get into? And once you've learned one, what are your steps, your thought process to go after another one, and then another one, and another one?
Anybody want to take this one?
So I start by cursing the new language that I'm trying to learn because it's not like the old language. So like I don't know, I just kind of come up with I don't necessarily seek out learning new programming language. Like I don't go like, oh, I feel like I know Java really well, so now I need to learn JavaScript or whatever. It's just whatever language is going to be the best to solve whatever problem I'm working on. So right now I've been working on a Python script. I absolutely hate Python. And it's mostly me just like kind of cursing Python and Googling every little thing that I knew how to do in all of the other languages that I did. And then just with use, I learn it.
I guess another point is reflect on what area interests you the most, because with Java, you have a great starting point. If you want to get more focused on the back end, there's a certain pathway you can take with that. If you want to get focused on being a full stack and having a touch point with the front end, you probably want to introduce a little JavaScript. If you really like mobile development, then you might want to look into something like Kotlin, because that's the newer mobile dev. So it all depends on where your passion aligns and what you're looking for, I would say.
I would, so I personally love learning new languages and will do so just for the sake of learning something new. So in that respect, I may be a little different from Izzy. However, I would argue that you really want to stay with that first language probably longer than what you might even want to. And just, I mean, and this is coming from someone who I find extreme value in learning other languages. And I absolutely think you need to dive into them. And I posted a link in chat of something I wrote on how I think you should diversify your language portfolio, so to speak, and the way to think about choosing a different language. Absolutely, there's like just like a pragmatic, are you interested in front end, back end, you know, a particular company or job opening, and you know they use a certain language, like those are all deciding factors. But from just like a growth standpoint, like a personal growth standpoint, I think having diversity in, like, you know, have you worked with a dynamically typed language? Then look into statically typed languages. Have you worked with a object-oriented language? Look into functional programming languages. If you're used to high-level abstraction, look to low-level programming languages. Like, diversify that exposure, because at some point you are exposed to enough that they all start to look familiar. Like, and you can pick up whatever, you know, whatever the next demand is, you can pick it up that much more readily because you're familiar with that paradigm, you're familiar with that way of thinking. But, you know, again, stick with a language for, you know, I'd say a while, because there are just some things you won't discover about programming in general if you don't spend enough time with the language. And plus, like at learning a new language, the syntax especially after like maybe the third or fourth, the syntax is pretty easy. If it's a programming paradigm that you're familiar with, and that part you'll kind of already pick up. What immediately becomes like the impossible wall to scale, at least quickly, is the ecosystem surrounding the language and knowing what people use for different types of problems and how to use them. And I'll kind of give you an example. Like I've spent the last 2 years working primarily in C#, .NET, and I've been looking into Java and Kotlin recently. And Java in particular, it was very easy to pick up syntax going from C# to Java, but understanding the ecosystem, understanding Spring Boot, like that's the challenge. And so if you don't spend enough time with the language, you never dive into those things. And those are the aspects, I think, of learning a language, learning that surrounding like ecosystem, learning the popular libraries, packages, the common way of handling things with those libraries. That's going to really, it just makes a difference. It helps a ton. And it's often the difference between reinventing a wheel that's already been invented and designed really well, and and then versus just knowing that right package, that right library to reach for and utilize. So definitely soak in that first language in particular.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot. Go ahead, Izzy.
Sorry, I just want to expand on Jake's point of getting really good at one language before you move on. I think that is a really helpful like way and path that new developers should go down. I think like new developers see experienced developers and see that experienced developers have 5 languages under their belt, and you're just still struggling with one. But the reason that experienced developers can have so many languages under their belts is because we got super good with one language, and then it was a lot easier to transfer the skills and pick up the newer ones.
Absolutely. So we spent a lot of time talking about skills, portfolios, that kind of thing, and differentiating to get to the interview. I think it'd be good for us to dive in a little bit more into the interview itself and talking about some of those aspects. So Richie, so you got a question, and then I see Jamal raised his hand as well, and maybe Brian as well. So go ahead.
So my question is not in regards to technical interview, or as Izzy explained, it is not in regards to any language or anything, but I just wanted to know the overall process about any non-technical role. For example, project manager, or maybe scrum master, or it could be say release manager. What is the standard process that is being followed at maybe Kroger? And also I wanted to know what are the key parameters that they look into the candidate, I mean best candidate. I'm not sure if this is the right question or accurate question to be raised with this group, but just wanted to bring up if this can be passed.
It is a great question. Again, like you're saying, I know a lot of people in this group are mostly technical. So I'm not sure. Does anybody want to answer this? Do they have the experience to really speak to that?
Or to connect with me after this call, I can break that down with you.
Okay, sounds good.
So my question is, basically I've spent the last like 10 years working on like the social service field. During the interview process, how much should you talk about like non-technical experience? Like if they ask me, of course, like what I've done in the past, of course, I'm going to like elaborate a little bit on it. But like I've had like thoughts of like, I don't want to continue to talk about, hey, social services, counseling, blah, blah, blah. Because at the end of the day, they're not hiring someone to do that job.
I'm a new developer. I don't have like interview clout. I don't interview developers, but I think of being a developer as like mostly being a good communicator. It's like code is your instrument to solve problems, and problems are like, the domain of any professional. So I think that your non-programming experience is especially related. And I'm biased because I came to development through a non-traditional path, as I'm sure many of you are, but I studied English and worked in like a marketing SEO space for a while. So I actually think that experience ended up being valuable and sort of gave me, if not an edge, at least like a differentiating factor between the people who are like straight from comp sci college, like to an engineering job. So I say highlight your 10 years of social services because communication is important, as everyone will tell you. And I'm sure you have quite the sharpened communication skills from your social service time.
That was an amazing answer.
Thank you.
I would like to kind of tack onto that. So I agree. Coming from somewhere else, it's a lot easier to talk about where you've been. And I kind of find it difficult to relay like more technical concepts, especially during the interview when I don't have that much technical experience to draw off of. So I find myself talking about my previous experiences more often than not. And I was kind of curious about how to like bridge that gap and to make it more relevant.
I mean, there's always things you can pull out of that, and definitely have yourself prepared so that you are thinking about these are the things from that experience that I think translate extremely well into what I'm going to be doing. So whether that be teamwork or whether that be the ability to solve problems and understand what the user really wants, those kind of things. And like Corey, I came to software development very non-traditionally. I worked mostly retail up until I got into programming. And that actually taught me a lot about working with customers and working with people. And for a long time, I saw that as a drag on my career. And it took me a while to realize the skills that had taught me and really had brought value to what else I was doing. So keep that in mind to think about beforehand and think about how you're going to sell that. Not that it's a detriment, just always knowing how you're going to sell something is just a generally good practice.
I think I want to kind of add to what Michael said, maybe. So one, when we're talking about being prepared, I would encourage you to not just think about it, but write it down. This was in my previous career, but it's something I kind of carried over into my software development career. But one of the best things I did before going out there for that first job was back at the time, monster.com was still kind of a big deal. And they had common interview questions. And I think I gathered like 50 of them and grouped them into different types of questions, and then wrote about a paragraph of how I would respond to each one. And every interview I went to after that, I already had a pretty solid response to just about anything that could be asked. And I think kind of fast forward then into my transition into the software development field, I did something very similar, where I looked up what those interview questions would be. Obviously, some of them are going to be technical or based off of your experience with technical things, but not all of them. You're going to have questions like, how do you handle a challenging situation? How do you handle a client having a big ask or having to adjust requirements on you? And those are like human being problems, not software development problems. And as long as you're a human being, like you've got experience that will help you address those issues. But that's where like you don't want to be thinking up those answers on the fly. Like you want to have already sat down and thought about, how does my past career, my past work experience relate to this type of question? And there will definitely be those soft skill questions, and they are, I think Izzy kind of hinted at this, they are as important, if not more important, than some of the technical questions, depending on who you're interviewing with. Because soft skills are as important, if not more important, to the job of being a software developer. And I think something else to just keep in mind as you're looking up, and you can easily Google like what are common questions asked in tech, in interviews in general and software development interviews in specific. Write out some answers to it, but the question you're always answering, no matter what the actual question is how does my answer demonstrate that I can bring value to your team, to your company, to your whatever. So as you're describing your past experience, how does that past experience bring value to them? How does it meet a need that this company has? And of course, some of those needs are technical, but again, not all of them. A team that works really well together is a team that's made up of people who know how to communicate, who know how to forgive, who know how to learn from each other, like all these other, there's all these other components to making a good team and making a good product beyond the technical. So yeah, don't underestimate those things, but frame them, in terms of the current job you're looking to get hired for.
That's
Thank you,
great.
Jake.
Thank you very much.
So Brian, did you get to ask your question? Did you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question. I can kind of follow up on what Jake was just talking about, though. I had a different experience when it came to preparing for interviews. I just graduated from Tech Elevator in December. When it came to getting ready for interviews, trying to have prepared answers for everything actually made me more nervous because I felt like I had to anticipate every question that they might possibly ask me. And so all of a sudden, the prospect of being asked something that I hadn't prepared for was terrifying. So I handled it a different way, and I decided I was going to do some preparation, but not go into them being over prepared. So I would do things, I don't have any of my prep sheets nearby, but I would write down 3 strengths, 2 weaknesses, a time when I failed and what I learned from that. And, and always try to relate those answers to a technical experience as well, so that you're kind of connecting the dots that way. Yeah, preparing too much wasn't good for me when it came to interviewing. So I don't know if anybody else has experienced that or not.
I think that brings up a good point that there is no formula that's going to fit for every person and also for every company that you're interviewing with. You've got to take your own individual self into consideration, and then you have to take the company you're interviewing with into consideration. And I think that's a good point, that these are, ultimately these are guidelines, things that other people have found worked for them. But I think maybe a good practice after an interview would be to kind of reflect, have a retrospect kind of, and think about, okay, what went well about that, what didn't, what would I do differently, and that way you kind of figure some of these things out for yourself. And it sounds like that's what you did, Brian, that you realize like, okay, this doesn't work for me. Let me iterate on that.
I don't know if I really reflected. I think I was just kind of winging it, and that's what worked for me.
I know one of the things that I find is helpful with almost anything is practice. And it doesn't really, sometimes people don't think about the practice. I know that at Max, you all do mock interviews, right? So I think that's a nice option for giving some practice. But even if you're not somewhere where that's specifically part of the curriculum, even just running through some questions, trying that out with a significant other or a friend or something like that, that could be a very effective way to prepare for that kind of scenario.
Yeah, so when I need to interview jobs, I usually have a throwaway interview, like a company that whatever, I'm not super invested in it. And that's my first interview, because the first interview is always the most nerve wracking. And because you're always just like, oh, I haven't done this in a while. Like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So like, I make sure I have a first interview that I don't super care about as I work my way up towards companies that I care about more.
I think what saved me from an interview was doing that mock interview like Michael mentioned. So I'm like an over preparer. I think I literally had a script of it, but I realized I'm like, oh, I don't know if they're going to deviate from, and ask me like questions I wasn't ready for. So I asked a friend to be on a Zoom call with me and just, help me just like do a mock interview. And that really helps me. And also I was surprised, like one of the worst job interviews I've done was when I went from Zoom video call to a phone call, actually. That threw me off a lot. And I had very little interview experience prior to, Tech Elevator, but I just want to tell people to like prepare like the Zoom calls and even phone calls, because it feels different and it, I don't know, it felt different.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
I can attest
Go
to
ahead, Brian.
that totally. One of my matchmaking interviews with Tech Elevator ended up being a phone interview at the last minute, and I was completely thrown, just by the change in venue, so to speak.
So this may or may not work for you, but I think it could be useful. I always prefer to take phone calls on my headphones, because the whole holding the phone up to my ear, it's always a little awkward. I'm worried that I'm not going to be hearing them well, that the microphone's not going to be picking up my voice. And so as long as I've prepped and I've tried using my headphones with my phone, that's how I like to do phone calls at this point. So do we want to talk a little about coding questions or anything like that? I know we've talked a lot about different parts of the interview, about different parts of the interview, but we haven't dug into technical questions. I'm sure that some of you have had practice with that. Do you have thoughts about what prepares you for that, or what you like to ask, or what you like to, how best to receive those questions?
I will say, like, it's something that I'm interested in as well, because I applied or got to at least like the technical step with 2 different companies before I ended up accepting an offer with one of them, and they were so wildly different from each other. From my own experience, but even with what I've read from others, it's left me, not feeling like there is a like, oh, this is what to expect and this is how to prepare. And just to give some specifics. The one was the equivalent to just like a coding kata, a coding challenge, and I had to do several of those, some by myself, some paired with a developer from the company. And then the other one, which I actually thought was kind of a cool idea, but it was a totally different approach. I got a Cypress.io test suite and a skeleton React project, and it was basically like get the test to pass, and it wasn't done in a timed way. It was, do it at your leisure and let us know when you're done, kind of a thing. But those were 2 very different approaches to technical interviewing, or at least testing technical proficiency.
Yeah, but every company does their technical interviews different ways. So I kind of view like how a company handles their technical interview as like, would I like to work at this company kind of deal? Because interviews go both ways, right? Then the company is interviewing you and you're interviewing the company. If a company is giving me this technical interview that's just straight up, tell me these definitions off the top of your head and you better know them exactly, that's not a company I want to work for. But if I have something kind of more that's like, here's a super easy challenge, like we just want to see what you're like when you pair, that's more what I look for when I'm doing technical interviews. So yeah, like
I can look into
I'll throw
this.
something out.
Go ahead,
there.
Michael.
Sorry. Okay, so one of the things when I do in an in-person interview, or sorry, video interview at this point, but when we do a coding challenge, one of the things that I always tell the candidate is talk through what you're doing. Talk through the way you're thinking about this problem. And there's several things that does. It gives me insight. Gives me insight into what the candidates, how they're processing the question. I can more easily detect, oh, I did not explain that part accurately. I need to give some clarification. It shows that you're actually thinking about the question, that you're not just, flailing like, I'll just write a for loop. So I find that back and forth where someone is actually talking about what they're doing to be super helpful.
I usually give that same advice to people when they, I've had some referrals to the company that I work for, and whenever they're getting up on the technical, I always tell them, just when you get to the pairing part, just talk through what you're doing. Just don't, what you don't want is just like dead silence for 5 minutes, and you're not writing code and you're not talking and nobody has any clue what's going on. Hopefully the interviewer doesn't let it stay silent for the full 5 minutes, but they might, and they have no idea what's going on in your head, and you're probably getting in your own head because of the silence, and it's just better to talk things through.
And if you haven't done that before, maybe practice it, maybe try it. If you want to run through a coding kata, and as you're doing it, you're talking to yourself about, well, now I'm going to do this thing because X, Y, Z,
How you think through a problem is probably as important as getting the correct answer. Like, obviously you want to talk through it and eventually arrive at the correct answer, but you can, and I've heard actual stories of this where they struggled, they ended up needing help from the interviewer, but based off of their thought process and how they were going like at the problem, how they were approaching it, like that, and that impressed the person they were working with, and kind of convinced them that, like, okay, this person knows how to think through a problem, they know how to communicate how they're thinking through a problem. These are all good things.
I know this sounds silly, and another tip I tell people, honestly, just open up your webcam and record yourself with interview prompts on your screen to see how you respond and see how it goes. A lot of companies now even use software like HireVue, where they will have prompts pop up on your screen that it asks the question and it will record your answer, and that goes to the team and the manager, where they get to see that as their kind of first introduction to you. And seeing how you interview, you might notice that you talk a lot with your hands. You might notice that there's awkward pauses or so it's just a good way to give yourself feedback. So that's one tip I always have. If you have a means to get a trial on HireVue to see if you can get a mock interview through them, just see what they're asking, that could be another means. I don't know if they do that from the candidate side, but that's something I would look into.
Thank you, Trip. That's really interesting advice. Thank you.
So Adam, your question in the chat about the code review part of an interview, is this like you wrote code and like send it off for review?
Yeah, they gave
Okay.
me a take-home challenge. So I have actually, I'm gonna do it tomorrow, and I'm kind of worried about it a little bit because it's the first time I've ever done this. So I don't know. If anyone has any advice, that'd be helpful. Yeah.
I don't have advice, but I have a lot of opinions on code reviews. Because like I said earlier, good code is different for every single person. My opinions on good codes are different than literally everybody else's. So I would view this kind of more as the feedback that you get from the code review is more going to be you interviewing them. Are they being nitpicky about stuff that you think is little? Are they, trying to help you improve your code in a code review, or are they just trying to point out your mistakes? Because I've worked with a lot of developers who view code reviews as a way to point out somebody else's mistakes, as opposed to a way to help someone improve how they write code. And those people always frustrate me. I don't think that really answers your question, but I have a lot of opinions on code reviews.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Some places also use to.
There's a video of that, right, Izzy?
I think I mention it in like almost every talk that I give about how code reviews shouldn't be about tearing someone down. They should be about building someone up and helping them improve, right? If your code runs and works fine, there shouldn't be a reason why someone would reject your code review because you used an if statement instead of a case statement or something along those lines. Yeah, and I've worked with devs who are super nitpicky about that, and they would never pass a code review without sending it back with a comment, and those people are just really frustrating to work with for me.
I think there's a difference between the interviewer that is trying to honestly, genuinely understand your ceiling, right? Like just so they know where you're at, and it's just to give you honest feedback or just to get an idea of how you're going to come in and how much you know and how much you have yet to know. But it's about the growth potential that you have, right? But then, like Izzy, I think is referring to, there's the terrible interviewer that's like just completely, wrote a book about it, they act like, and they have a really difficult time getting down to your level. And so it's very condescending in that interview. There's been a lot of people in my experience, just students of mine, graduates, that have left those interviews crying, completely in tears, feeling like they're completely, no good because they're a green bean, when really that wasn't necessary. So I think that's what you're saying, is like you've had that experience where people are just really rude.
So one of the things that I feel strongly about is, to the best of my ability, I want the candidate to leave the interview feeling like they did the best they could, and that regardless of what happens, they want to work at the company. So we try to reserve a significant period of time at our every interview to entertain questions from the candidate about what work is like and why they would want to work with us, because that is a super important part of the process. Like has been said a few times, the interview goes both ways.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate that, like, the interview goes both ways. And I know, like, especially if you are, so I wasn't able to go through a boot camp, but I did use online resources and things while working full time to learn software development, get into this career. And there's definitely like a sense or a need to just get that first job. And that first job isn't important, but at the same time, like, if there are some serious red flags, like, walk away. You are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and you want to set yourself up for success. And to do that, you want to be at a company that's going to support your success, at least in some way. You certainly don't want to be at a company that's going to hinder your success and prevent it. And so you really are better off continuing to look. And so just try to remember that you are also interviewing them. You have some control in this discussion. It's not just they have all the power, they have all the control, and you're at their whim. It might feel that way, but you have preach to yourself, right? Like, I am interviewing them as well. This is about me feeling good about them just as much as it is them feeling good about me.
Are there some
Absolutely.
general red flags that you'd point at as something that anybody newer to this industry in particular should look at? Maybe not just general like company advice, but like when you're interviewing to be part of a tech company, what would you look at as red flags?
I would say the biggest thing I look for is a company that reflects the values, the things that I'm looking for. And that may not be the same as what you're looking for in a company. So when I was interviewing, and this is hard when you're starting out to really know and understand the industry and what companies are like, but my second job, when I was interviewing for my second job, I developed a list of questions for each company about their practices, about certain policies, that kind of thing. And there were certain things that I was looking for as signs that, oh, this company is really interested in growing their employees, or this company, cares about creating quality products, those kind of things. So those are some of the things that I looked for.
Yes, I agree with Michael. I think this is the most important thing I would like to share, that if you would like to stay in any organization for longer period, because I have spent around 8 years or 9 years as FTE in one of the biggest companies. All you need to look for is how they treat you. Do they care about you? Do they provide work-life balance? Do you have group to laugh with, laugh at you, laugh with you, of course? So these are the important things. Of course, we all know our jobs. We will do great. Skills come. I mean, we can learn the skills, but these things matter. I mean, if you, every morning you feel like to get up, drive and go and sit in that cabin, then that's the place you need to work. That's it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've learned recently is figuring out like what your motivations are. So what makes me excel as a developer, one of my motivations is teamwork. So understanding what your motivations are and then asking questions related to your motivations. So like if learning is the motivation, like see what sort of additional learning programs that they have. Some companies have training budgets. Do they send you to conferences? Are you given, time out of your work week to learn new stuff? If teamwork is your motivator, what do teams look like? How do teams function? Can you talk to somebody who would be on a team that, they're thinking about putting you on? Just kind of figure out your motivations and then ask questions related to them and see what your answers are. Also, if you leave an interview crying, like Jessica mentioned earlier, that's a big red flag.
That should never happen.
Yeah, that should never happen. I want to punch someone.
I almost want Jessica to tell me that name so I can call them. And
and there's so many of them. I wish there were just one. It's so sad. Now, not to scare all of you that are about to start interviewing. I didn't mean to do that, but there are some assholes out there.
Yeah.
There really are.
Yeah, and like
it's better to know that it exists, right?
Yeah.
Like if you leave an interview with like a weird feeling, trust that weird feeling.
But there are also really nice people.
Go ahead, Jessica.
I was going to say there are also really nice people that just have open arms that want you to enter the field, and they're super excited about you. And like Michael, like there are Michaels in the world. There's just it just depends. Then that's why researching and making sure that you're prepared before you get there is key, because you don't want them to trip you up.
Thank you, Jessica.
I guess another thing is if you get to the offer stage and any place gives you a ultimatum of sign it by now, that's never a good sign. If someone tells you you have to agree within 24 hours or right then and there, that should be a big red flag.
I've never heard of that as a red flag before. So I'm kind of curious, like why is that a red flag?
I've seen places where they say if this isn't signed within 24 hours, like we're going to rescind the offer. And to me, it's almost like they're trying to strong arm someone, like where you don't have time to review, consider all your options, and maybe you have other interviews going on. It's just, I consider it as a sign of they're trying to make you rush into something. Granted, there might be places that do it and it's fine, but typically if it's not a preset timeline, like if a manager says like, oh, you have a week to consider, that's more than reasonable. It's just when you get into that 48-hour window or less where it's like that something's off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should at least have the weekend to think about it.
Yeah, and I think that also, Trip, that's probably also trying to shut down any potential for negotiation. Is that correct?
That is correct, because it's trying to get you to just say like, oh, I have to take this or it's going to go away. And I think you should always have that room for negotiation. Even if you go to someone and they say it's not negotiable, if they pull the offer because you negotiate, is that really somewhere you want to put yourself in? Is that really somewhere you want to be?
She's Siona, my daughter.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. She just got shy and immediately left. So yeah.
Well, hi to Siona.
Yep.
I share this one a lot, this link about negotiation. I hope it's helpful to some people. I read it on a regular basis as well too. So
Yeah, I have it saved as a bookmark from when Michael sent it to me, and that was a couple months ago, and still haven't read it. So, but I have sent it on to a couple other people who have asked me about salary negotiations, and they've said it's helpful. I'm just lazy. It's fine.
anything else that anybody wants to talk about? I know we're at the end of our time, technically, but you know, I can go for a few more minutes if anybody's interested.
I'm gonna take off, but thank you, Michael. This was
Thanks,
a lot
Jay.
of fun.
Thanks, everybody. This has been really great. I've really enjoyed this. If you have feedback, please let me know. If there's things about this, about TN Tech that you think we can make better, if there's things that you particularly liked and you want to make sure keep happening, I'm always eager to hear that feedback. I'm hopeful. So I'm planning to send out, been planning for a while to send out an email to all the attendees just to get some feedback and maybe a quick survey. But, you know, still always one off is great too. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording then.